A year and a half since the onset of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, virtually nothing has been done to prevent a repeat. In our fourth story, Senate Democrats have a plan they say will fix that. And today, Republicans, with a little help from pollster Frank Luntz, officially announced their plan, block the Democrats' plan. Remind you of anything? Senator Chris Dodd says his banking committee bill would put an end to too big to fail banks and would help fill in the regulatory gaps that led to that financial crisis. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell claims the bill would do the exact opposite. And today, he got all 41 Senate Republicans to sign a letter to Harry Reid that says so. We are united in our opposition to the partisan legislation reported by the Senate Banking Committee. As currently constructed, this bill allows for endless taxpayer bailouts of Wall Street and establishes new and unlimited regulatory powers that will stifle small businesses and community banks. Notably, however, this letter does not threaten a filibuster that would prevent the Dodd bill from reaching the floor for debate next week. The letter does, however, contain the fingerprints of Republican pollster Frank Luntz. It was his group, the Word Doctors, which last year authored the anti-healthcare reform memo, which coached Republicans to fearmonger about rationing and government takeover. In January, the Word Doctors released another blueprint for defeating financial regulation reform. The 17-page document instructing Republicans to convince Americans that any Democratic legislation will lead to more bailouts, even though it was the Republicans who supervised the first round of bailouts. This week, it has become apparent that the Republicans are taking the Luntz advice. The DNC today releasing the following ad linking Leader McConnell's rhetoric on the Senate floor to the words Frank Luntz instructed him to say.
This bill not only allows for taxpayer-funded bailouts of Wall Street banks, it institutionalizes them.
Republicans seem to be taking a page out of a recent strategy memo by pollster Frank Luntz.
Let me say that again. This bill not only allows for taxpayer-funded bailouts for Wall Street banks, it actually institutionalizes them.
The single best way to kill any legislation is to link it to the big bank bailout.
It's a bill that actually guarantees future bailouts of Wall Street banks.
Now to bail out and call in the Washington editor of The Nation magazine, Chris Hayes, or as I know him, Chris L. Hayes on Twitter. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Keith. How are you?
Before the politics, the substance of this, Chris Dodd says his bill will end bailouts forever, and 41 Republicans have today signed this letter that says that Dodd's bill will instead cause endless taxpayer bailouts of Wall Street. Are either of these somewhat mutually exclusive statements correct?
I would say neither are in this case. I mean, first of all, let's talk about the Republicans. It is a staggering act of bad faith to say this institutionalizes bailouts for two reasons. One is the status quo is bailouts. Mm-hmm. This is the party that engineered the largest bailout in the history of the American Republic. So we all know exactly what's going to happen if something like this happens again under what we have now, which is that the Chamber of Commerce and the Financial Services Roundtable and the big banks are going to go up to Capitol Hill and they're going to panic everyone. And Glenn Beck is going to get on the air and say we need the bailout. That's an important piece of history for everyone. And the bailout's going to pass. That is the status quo. Second of all, when you look at the actual substance of the bill, the money that this $50 billion pool of money that's going to be used to pay for a, quote, bailout is coming from the banks. It's not taxpayer money. It is taxed off the banks. In terms of Dodd saying it will end bailouts forever, look, the precedent has been set. If things get bad enough, what has been clear is that, Congress is going to be there to sort of patch the holes of the leaking ship. So I don't even think you can say that. But what's happening on the Republican end is really, really remarkable bad faith.
Is there any indication Luntz's message regarding endless bailouts is resonating the way some of his health care misstatements did?
Well, I think it's really early in this, and I think that there's an encouraging aspect of this, which is that unlike death panels, et cetera, and all the craziness that came out in healthcare, Democrats are pushing back much more ferociously, much more quickly, I think much more effectively. And I think they also sense that basically they have the politics on their side in this contest. I mean, people don't want to be on the side of the Wall Street banks, and so they're trying to pin their opponents that way. And it's going to be a contest over who is most against the Wall Street banks.
Sure.
But I do wonder how much, it's early in this. And one of the things about the death panels and all that misinformation is that it was that it kept getting repeated so long by the right-wing noise machine that made it sink in.
But now isn't that the essence of this? Because the president today framed the debate again by asking this rhetorical question about Congress. Are they going to side with the special interest in the status quo, or are they going to side with the American people? When opponents of this government of this president obviously will believe anything. They're just looking for a rationalization to justify what they want to believe to begin with. If that's the case, what happens if, as seems to be the indication here, both sides are making the same argument and the same claim? We're going to do this and the other side is not. If both of them say that, do they neutralize each other or what happens?
That's what's so remarkable about this debate. I mean, it's like we're through some sort of postmodern looking glass because actually the substance here has become completely abstracted. And there's a Democratic operative I know who uses the term post-truth politics to describe this dynamic, which I think is quite apt. Democrats shouldn't fool themselves into thinking, and I just saw on the internet before I came in the studio, that they're now talking about, okay, we're going to get rid of the $50 billion fund. In this environment of post-truth politics, policy concessions will not affect the politics. You will be accused of creating bailouts in perpetuity, no matter what the actual policy grounds are. The reason I think the Democrats have the upper hand is that in this case, they can draw from the sort of store of reputational capital that has been built up, in which I think people are more inclined to think that in a contest between the two parties about who is most opposed to the bank's interests, the Democrats are. And that might actually, be less true than people quite realize, but I think they actually have that leg up.
Chris Hayes of The Nation and Lamb Chop Illustrated. Have a great weekend. Take care.
You too, Keith.